For me, nothing beats apple pie around Christmas time. A nice warm slice accompanied with a rochet of vanilla ice cream. And this is how I make my caramel apple pie, perfectly spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg and a hint of bourbon. First we're going to start off by making our caramel sauce. Start by bringing cream to a boil on a medium heat. We want the cream to be as hot as possible, so when we add it to the dry caramel, it doesn't seize the sugar. Once the cream has come to a boil, we're just going to cover it with a lid and place it to the side. Next, into a clean pan, we're going to make our dry caramel. Start the pan off on a low to medium heat. Add about a quarter of the sugar, just enough to cover the base of the pan. We're going to make this dry caramel in increments. By doing this in small portions, we can make the caramel a lot faster. Also, we avoid burning parts of the caramel and some parts being crystallized. If you have any clumps, you can start to break them down gently, but avoid mixing any sugar until you start to see the caramel forming. As the sugar starts to caramelize, I start to bring in the sugar from the outside of the pan to the middle, and just keep this movement going until all the sugar turns into caramel. Once that first portion of sugar has turned into a caramel, we can start to add some more sugar. Add enough sugar just to cover the surface of the caramel, and keep mixing by bringing the caramel from the outside of the pan to the middle. Keep repeating this process until all the sugar has been added in and become a caramel. Working with such a small quantity of sugar, you want to maintain a low to medium heat. This will stop the caramel from burning and reaching a high temperature too fast. The ideal temperature for the caramel is around 160 degrees Celsius to 170 degrees Celsius, or 320 degrees Fahrenheit to 338 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the caramel is ready, we're going to add in the hot cream. Slowly add in a portion at a time while constantly stirring. As the cream starts to incorporate into the caramel, add in the next portion. Again, keep this process going until all the cream is added into the caramel. Once all the cream is incorporated into the caramel, keep this on a low heat. Keep mixing until the caramel reaches 104 degrees Celsius or 220 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the caramel has reached the correct temperature, turn off your stove. Add in the knob of butter and keep mixing until the butter is completely emulsified. Caramel sauce will last for weeks in the fridge, so you can easily make this well in advance and store in the fridge until you need it. Once the butter is fully emulsified, add in your sea salt and mix until dissolved. I made this caramel sauce on the same day and I just let it chill in the fridge for 2 hours. I decanted it into a container and surface wrapped with cling film to avoid skin forming. Next, we're going to make the pie dough. Into a mixing bowl, start by adding flour, sugar and salt. Give this a light whisk just to distribute the sugar and salt in the flour. Next, add in your unsalted butter. I've cut these into 1 cm cubes. With your fingers, just gently rub the butter into the flour. We just want to coat the flour in the butter. We don't want to melt any of the butter into it. You can also do this in the food processor, but I prefer to do it by hand as I have more control over it. Once you reach this sandy consistency, we can start to form the dough. We do this by adding in ice cold water. I've got about 75 milliliters of ice cold water here. I start by adding around 25 milliliters and mixing with a spoon just until the flour starts to hydrate. The flour is starting to take on some of the water, but not quite enough to bring the dough together. So I add in another 25 milliliters and continue to mix with a spoon. The flour has taken on all that cold water and I can see it starting to form a dough on my spoon. Now with my hands I just start to compress the dough together. Just slowly bringing it together, pushing it against the wall of the bowl. I don't want to work it too much and start to activate the gluten. This is going to result in the pie dough shrinking when it bakes in the oven. Once the dough starts to come together, I'm just going to wrap this in cling film or plastic wrap and leave it to rest in the fridge for a minimum of 1 hour. Pie dough can be made well in advance. It will last in the fridge for up to a week. As long as it hasn't gone grey, it's all good to use. Next we're going to make the streusel topping before we get onto the filling. For the streusel topping, into a mixing bowl, add in flour, salt, sugar, and cold unsalted butter, which I've cut into 1 cm cubes again. Same process as the pie dough, just start working it with your fingers and keep mixing. Here you don't have to be so gentle because we want this to start to form a dough. This will only take a couple of minutes by hand. You can also do this in a stand mixer with a paddle attachment. I'm doing this by hand so I have a feel for when to stop. I'm just mixing in the butter until it melts and coats the flour. As it starts to coat the flour, it's forming that sandy consistency we had earlier with the pie dough. Here I press a lot harder to bring the dough together, but only to a point where the dough can still crumble between my fingers. If I kept mixing beyond this point, I'd form a solid dough. I wouldn't be able to break it down to form the crumble topping. This just goes into the fridge to set firm until we need it for the final bake. Now we're going to move on to the filling. Start by peeling and coring your apples. I'm using a combination of Bramley cooking apples and Royal Gala apples. I find that the combination of the two apples provide the perfect balance of sweet and tartness, especially with the addition of the sweet caramel sauce. Bramley apples break down beautifully, creating a rich and thick sauce, while Royal Gala holds its shape, so you get a lovely mix of saucy and chunky fruit in every bite. You can use any apple variety you like, but each variety behaves differently. Some break down a lot faster, while others hold their shape. Some have a lot more sweetness, some are a bit more tart, and some varieties are a combination of both. I would recommend substituting Bramley apples for Granny Smith apples, and Royal Gala apples for either Bourboun or Honeycrisp apples. Granny Smith will hold its shape a little better, but still breaks down enough to provide that saucy texture. While Bourboun's are a little bit more tart than Gala apples, but will still hold firm to provide the chunky fruit in the filling. Once all the apples have been peeled and cored, we're going to dice them into roughly 2 cm pieces. I cut the apples in half and then half again, and then each quarter into 4 pieces. The size of the apple is also going to determine the consistency of your filling. Smaller diced apples are going to break down a lot faster, giving you more of a saucy filling with less chunks, while larger pieces of apple will be less saucy and have a lot more apple chunks through the filling. I find that having 2 to 3 cm pieces provide the perfect balance between having a saucy and chunky apples in your filling. Once all the apples are diced, we're going to partially cook the filling. By partially cooking the filling, we're going to help the apples release their juices. Into a pan, add in the diced apples, light brown sugar, cornflour or cornstarch, unsalted butter, sea salt, ground cinnamon, and ground nutmeg, and finally bourbon. And then switch to a smaller pan because you realise your stock pot doesn't work on your induction hob. It goes without saying, use a vessel where you have enough space to move the filling around. This is the largest pot I have that will work on my induction, so I'm kind of living on the edge here with the apple filling right to the brim of the pan. Nonetheless, we make it work. I've set my hob to a medium heat, and every so often I'm just going to keep mixing the apple filling. You might find that before the apples have released their juices, the apples are sticking to the bottom of the pan. If this is the case, you can add a splash of water or a tiny bit of apple juice to help deglaze the bottom of the pan. Like I was saying earlier, we partially cook the filling to help release the juices from the apples. This means in the final bake, we avoid any shrinking of the filling. If we were to skip this step and just put the filling straight into the pie case and bake, you'd find at the end of the bake, either the pie top has sunk or there's a hollow spot between the filling and the pie top. This way we guarantee a perfectly filled pie that holds its shape even when cut. To check the pie filling is ready, Pierce an apple with a knife, and if the knife goes through with minimal effort and the apple piece doesn't break apart, the filling is ready. Place the filling into a bowl and surface wrap with cling film. We're going to let the filling cool down for about 30 minutes or so. We want the filling to be around lukewarm for when we add in the caramel sauce. If we added the caramel sauce in straight away, we risk the butter and cream splitting. In the meantime, let's prepare the pie case. Lightly dust the workbench with some flour and the top of your pie dough. Lightly flour your rolling pin and roll the dough, working in a north to south direction, rotating the dough after a few rolls to try and keep it as round as possible. I'm sorry, but you're going to keep seeing the back of my head. I'm working with a new camera setup and I didn't realise I was leaning in under the camera lens. We're going to roll this dough out until it's about 12 inches or 30 centimeters wide and about 5 millimeters thick. If you find that there's some gaps that fall short, where there's some excess, just break it off and patch it in. Just give it a light roll just to seal it all together. Then transfer it to a baking tray and transfer it to the fridge for 5 to 10 minutes just to bring the temperature back down. Next we prepare the pie dish. Lightly grease the pie dish with either cooking spray or some butter. Sprinkle in some flour and gently rotate the pan, allowing the flour to stick to the walls and base of the pan. This is going to help stop the pie dough from sticking completely to the tin. I start off by covering the base and then rotating to cover the walls, allowing the excess to spill off the edge. Now we line the tin with the pie dough. Start by placing the pie dough over the top of the tin. With one hand lift the dough towards you, using the other hand to tuck the dough into the base. Keep working your way around until the pie dough makes contact with the base and wall of the tin. Gently fold over the excess over the lip of the tin, and with a pair of scissors I like to trim the dough, leaving a centimeter overhang from the lip of the pan. Keep a hold of the offcuts for the moment. They might help patch any gaps in the dough later on. By leaving that 1 centimeter overhang, I'm able to tuck the dough in under itself, creating a thicker rim. This will just allow for a little bit more structural support, especially when crimping. It takes practice working with pie dough. Room temperature and everything else can affect how quickly you have to work with pie dough. After I've tucked in the excess dough in under itself, I'm just going to neaten up the edge and make sure it hasn't lifted up in any spots. Then I'm going to crimp the crust. Do this by pressing my index finger inside the dough between my thumb and index finger on the outside. And using the offcuts, where I see any gaps or cracks, I will just patch up with a little bit of dough. Now we're almost ready to bake. Once the apple pie filling is slightly cooled, combine it with the caramel sauce we made earlier. Fold the caramel sauce through the apple filling until it has distributed evenly. You can also make your apple pie filling days in advance. It will last for up to 3 days in the fridge. If you do this, just allow that caramel sauce and apple filling to come up to room temperature before mixing, and line the pie tin with the pie dough once the filling is ready. Once the filling has come together, we're going to fill in the pie case. Although we pre-cooked the filling, there still will be a tiny bit of shrinking, so we want to make sure we pile the filling high. But if you follow this recipe to the T, you'll have more than enough filling to fill the pie case. Now for the final step. Take your chilled streusel topping and distribute it evenly across the surface of the pie. Then place your pie tin onto a baking tray and into the oven at 170 degrees Celsius or 328 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 to 55 minutes. Once your pie is baked, leave to cool for 3 to 4 hours before serving. I tend to make my pies a day in advance. I leave to cool at room temperature and then leave to set in the fridge overnight, and then warm the pie in the oven just before serving. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. The link for the full recipe on my website is in the description below, along with the affiliate links for all the equipment I use. Until next time, happy baking!